Yo, what's going on guys, and welcome to the fourth installment of the Program Explained series. In this video, we are going to be covering a shoulder and arm day, which is of course the fourth day of the 6-day per week frequency program in my new myofibular hypertrophy program, which is available on my website, link in the description. Now, before we start the video, I'd like to mention that I already have a Science Explained video on my channel where I go more in depth on the anatomy and function of the biceps, triceps, forearms, brachialis, brachioradialis, and coracobrachialis. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd definitely go check that video out. So without further delay, let's get right into the shoulder and arm day, starting off with a superset of a seated incline dumbbell biceps curl, followed by a standing reverse grip barbell curl. Now, the reason I chose these exercises were first because in this workout, we will want to hit every head of the biceps, triceps, their surrounding muscles, as well as your delts and forearms. And since the long head of the biceps will likely hypertrophy most when curling away from the torso, as well as when training through a fully lengthened position, the incline dumbbell biceps curl hits these criteria perfectly. And of course, since we also want to work on our forearms, as well as our other often neglected muscles such as the brachialis, I included a reverse curl immediately after the biceps curl to hopefully unbias the biceps by pre-fatiguing them and get a good focus on the forearms and your arms' other elbow flexors. For this exercise, you'll want to focus very hard on the target muscle, as well as, of course, you'll want to perform an explosive concentric followed by a slow and controlled eccentric, and lastly hold in the stretch position for a few seconds. I'd also like to mention that since most arm and shoulder work isn't very fatiguing at all, you may optionally take every set to or past failure if you know you'll recover before the next session. For one example, I typically do this by reaching failure and then following that with a few reps of long muscle length partials. Now, moving on to our second exercise, we have a seated incline dumbbell overhead tricep extension. Now, of course, if you don't like doing this with dumbbells, you may optionally do a cable loaded variation, which may potentially yield a greater resistance profile for hypertrophy since the direction of gravity is no longer a limiting factor. Now, for this exercise, I'd focus on keeping your elbows in tight towards your torso when performing the eccentric and going very slow with a hard focus on getting a good stretch for the triceps. Now, when it comes to the concentric, you may flare your elbows out a bit as this seems to be a more comfortable position to contract for a lot of my trainees. However, you should focus on using as little momentum as possible by ensuring you had a proper pause in the stretch position, as well as ensuring that you're solely contracting at the elbow and limiting the use of any surrounding muscles. So now we're on to our third exercise, which is another superset, starting with a dumbbell front raise and then followed by a dumbbell lateral raise. Now, for this superset, since both exercises focus on the shoulders, you may rest up to 30 seconds between each front and lateral raise. Now, in regards to your form, you'll want to hold the dumbbells a bit further from your torso in the hole for the front raise, and then contract by bringing the dumbbells up in a diagonal fashion to get a stronger contraction on the anterior delt. And as for the lateral raise, you'll want to bend over slightly, retract your scapula, and raise the dumbbells slightly ahead of your body, ensuring you're properly in the scapular plane. Now, for these exercises, you can choose to hold in the fully contracted position as some coaches recommend, or you can simply do the raise without a pause, since either way is perfectly fine and should have very similar hypertrophy outcomes regardless, given that you simply ensure you're training to or close to failure and feel the exercise actually working on the target muscle. So now that we're done with that, we're on to our fourth exercise, which is any preacher or spider curl variation, so long as your arm is out in front of your torso and you're actively thinking of curling closer to your midline, contrary to our previous curl in this workout. With this curl, we're looking to hopefully bias the bicep short head by having your arms contracting closer to your midline, as well as we're focusing more on hitting your biceps in the fully shortened position in order to ensure we hit the muscle in a variety of positions, leaving little to no gains on the table. Now, personally for this exercise, I use a preacher curl machine since the constant tension from the cable allows for me to feel a very strong bicep stretch on the distal insertion of my biceps rather than the typical proximal insertion stretch that you'd feel with a bicep curl variation that's behind your torso, as well as the fact that it causes the hardest portion of the curl to be in the start of the curl rather than the middle or final portion of the curl as we typically expect from most other curl variations. Now, with this exercise, you'll want to focus on the usual tempo of a hold in the stretch position, followed by an explosive concentric, then of course holding in the contract position, and ending of course with a slow and controlled eccentric before repeating. Which leads us on to our fifth exercise, a cable crossover tricep extension, which you of course can optionally substitute for a simple tricep press down if, like me, you find the crossover to be a bit awkward to perform. So for this exercise, like any other tricep exercise, the main focus is to move only at the elbow, allowing the triceps to solely handle the load. Now, since this exercise won't be overhead, it will be of course hitting the triceps in its fully shortened position, unlike the last tricep extension we had performed, of course again for variety and to ensure we aren't missing out on any gains. For this exercise, you'll of course want to perform a relatively quick concentric followed by a 1 to 2 second hold in the contracted position where you focus hard on feeling your triceps, and then followed by a slow and controlled eccentric with a minimal 1 second hold in the stretch position to limit any momentum. So moving on to our sixth exercise, we of course can't forget the rear delts, so I've included a cable crossover rear delt fly or a lying incline bench dumbbell reverse fly. Now, given the anatomy of your rear delts, when performing this exercise, you'll want to stay around a 45-degree arm flare from your torso instead of the usual 90-degree flare I often see trainees do. Now, again, there is no special benefit to holding in the contracted position for any delt work, contrary to popular belief, so my main recommendation would just be to focus on reaching failure with the stimulus mainly being felt in your target muscle, which for this exercise is of course the rear delts. Which brings us on to our last exercise, a standing crossbody hammer curl. Now, the reason I chose the crossbody curl is to hopefully focus again on the bicep short head, since we of course want to build that short head definition and aesthetic when hitting the front double biceps pose. And of course, since flexing your biceps closer to your midline seems to bias the bicep short head, as well as it will likely hit your coracobrachialis for even more arm definition from the front, making this exercise of course a no-brainer. Not only that, I chose a hammer curl to also include a greater forearm brachialis and brachioradialis bias, which you can of course optionally do depending on whether you'd rather fully focus on your biceps or not. Now, for this exercise, you'll of course want to follow my regular tempo and focus hard on your biceps. However, I also strongly recommend focusing on really contracting your coracobrachialis by bringing your arm in tight towards your midline with each rep, since its function is to adduct your arm in towards your torso. I'd also lastly like to mention that finishing each set with a long muscle length partial is also a great idea for this exercise, since when I do them, I seem to have a very good stimulus with little to no fatigue, again of course since it's a curl. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone so much for making it this far into the video, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, comment if you have any questions or feedback, and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. Also, if you found the information in this video useful and know someone else who might also find it useful, don't forget to share the video, as this will greatly help the growth of my channel. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll be seeing you guys next time. Peace.